You wake up one morning and something feels different. Not in a bad way necessarily, just different. You're drinking your coffee the same way you always do. You're sitting in the same chair. But something has shifted, and you can't quite name it. Maybe it's the way you responded to a friend yesterday. You used to laugh at their jokes, but this time you didn't. Or maybe it's the music you've been listening to lately. The songs that used to move you now feel like they belong to someone else. Someone you used to be. This happens more often than we talk about. We change slowly, so slowly that we don't notice it happening. Then one day, we look in the mirror and think, who is this person? If you enjoy these conversations about life and growth, subscribing helps more people discover them. But let's keep going. Identity is a strange thing. We think of ourselves as solid, consistent. I'm this kind of person. I like these things. I believe this. We build a story about who we are, and we tell that story to ourselves every day. It becomes comfortable, familiar. But life doesn't let us stay the same. Something happens. A relationship ends. A new job starts. Someone we love passes away. We move to a different city. And suddenly the story we've been telling doesn't fit anymore. Here's what makes it confusing. The change isn't dramatic. You don't wake up as a completely different person. It's more like parts of you start to feel loose. Like a sweater that doesn't fit quite right anymore. You can still wear it, but it's tight in some places and too loose in others. Think about someone you knew 5 years ago, maybe a close friend. If you saw them today, they'd probably seem the same in many ways. Same laugh maybe, same way of talking. But if you spent real time with them, you'd notice the differences, new opinions, different priorities. They might care about things they used to ignore. They might have stopped caring about things that used to matter. You've done the same thing. You've changed in ways you might not even see yet. Let me tell you about Maria. She worked in finance for 8 years. Good job, good money, respected by her colleagues. When people asked what she did, she'd say, "I'm a financial analyst." And that felt true. It wasn't just her job, it was part of who she was. Then she started taking photography classes on weekends, just for fun. Something to do besides work. But after a few months, she noticed something strange. At parties, when people asked about her job, she felt bored talking about it. She wanted to talk about photography instead, about light and composition and the photos she'd been taking. This created a weird feeling. She was still going to work every day, still doing the same job. But inside, something had shifted. The identity that used to fit her perfectly now felt like borrowed clothes. She hadn't quit her job. She hadn't made any big changes. But she wasn't the same person anymore, and that scared her. This is what identity shift feels like. It's not always about big life changes. Sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's just noticing that the person you are today wouldn't make the same choices as the person you were last year. Maybe you used to love going out every weekend. Now you'd rather stay home with a book. Maybe you used to avoid conflict at all costs. Now you speak up when something bothers you. Maybe you used to think success meant one thing, and now it means something completely different. These aren't failures. They're not problems to solve. They're signs that you're growing. But growth is uncomfortable because it means letting go of the old version of yourself. And we get attached to that old version even when it doesn't serve us anymore. By the end of this conversation, you might see your own changes differently. Not as something to fear, but as something natural. Something human. The tricky part is that nobody teaches us how to handle this. We're taught how to build an identity. Choose a career. Develop your interests. Figure out what you believe. But we're not taught what to do when all of that starts to shift. When the foundation we built our life on begins to feel unstable. You might be in the middle of this right now, feeling like you're between versions of yourself, not quite who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. It's a strange place to be, lonely sometimes, confusing often. But here's something worth knowing. This feeling, this sense of being in transition, it's more common than you think. Most people are going through some version of it. They just don't talk about it much. It's easier to pretend we're consistent, stable, unchanging. Easier to act like we've got it all figured out. The truth is messier. We're all constantly becoming slightly different versions of ourselves. Some changes are small, some are big, but none of us stay exactly the same. In the next part, we'll talk about where identity comes from in the first place, how we build our sense of who we are. Because to understand why change feels so threatening, we need to understand what we're actually changing from. Think about that for a moment. Who were you 5 years ago? What did you care about? What made you happy? And how much of that is still true today? So where does identity come from? How do we become who we are? Most of it starts when we're young, before we can even think about it. Your family tells you things about yourself, and you believe them. You're the quiet one. You're the creative one. You're good at sports. You're shy. These labels stick to you like name tags, and after a while, you start to think they're true. Your parents might say, "Oh, she doesn't like new people," and suddenly that becomes part of your story, even if it was only true once, at one birthday party when you were 5. But the label stays, and you carry it into your teenage years, your 20s, maybe longer. Then school adds more layers. You discover you're good at math or you're terrible at it. You make friends with certain people, and that shapes how you see yourself. Maybe you become the funny one in your group, or the responsible one, the one people come to for advice. These roles feel natural after a while, but they're still just roles, patterns you fell into. By the time you're an adult, you've collected all these pieces: stories from your family, experiences from school, feedback from friends, successes and failures at work. You've built a picture of who you are. And that picture feels solid, real, like it's always been there. But here's the thing. Most of these pieces weren't really chosen. They just happened to you. You absorbed them. Someone said something and you believed it. Something worked once, so you kept doing it. You became a certain kind of person because the people around you expected it, needed it, or rewarded it. Let me tell you about David. He grew up in a family that valued achievement, good grades, good college, good job. His parents were proud when he succeeded, so he kept succeeding. He studied hard, got into a respected university, landed a position at a law firm. Everyone told him he was doing great. His parents bragged about him to their friends. His colleagues respected him. When people asked what he did, saying, "I'm a lawyer," carried weight. It meant something. But inside, David felt empty. He'd never actually asked himself if he wanted to be a lawyer. It just seemed like the right path, the smart path. And once he started, stopping felt impossible. Too much invested. Too many people expecting him to continue. His identity as a successful lawyer wasn't really his. It was built from other people's expectations, other people's definitions of success. But he'd worn it for so long that he didn't know who he'd be without it. This happens to a lot of us. We build an identity from pieces that were handed to us, and we defend that identity because changing it feels like admitting we were wrong, like wasting years of our life. Your job becomes part of your identity, not just what you do, but who you are. When you meet someone new, one of the first questions is usually, "What do you do?" And your answer carries meaning. It tells people how to see you, how to categorize you. Your relationships shape your identity too. Being someone's partner, someone's parent, someone's friend, these connections tell you who you are. When a relationship ends, it's not just losing the person. It's losing a piece of yourself. The version of you that existed in that relationship. Your beliefs work the same way. Political views, religious views, opinions about how the world works. You hold on to them tightly because they're part of your foundation. Changing your mind feels dangerous, like the ground beneath you is cracking. Even small things become identity markers. The music you listen to, the books you read, the way you spend your free time. You might think, "I'm the kind of person who runs marathons," or "I'm the kind of person who stays up late," or "I'm not a morning person." These statements feel true, but they're just patterns, habits that became part of your story about yourself. Here's what's interesting. A lot of your identity is about consistency. You want to be the same person tomorrow that you are today. When you act in ways that don't match your self-image, it creates discomfort. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. Your brain doesn't like contradictions, so if you see yourself as generous and you do something selfish, it bothers you. Not because the action was necessarily wrong, but because it doesn't match your story. You think, "That's not like me." And you either change your behavior to match your identity, or you change your identity to match your behavior. Usually we change our behavior. It's easier. We apologize, we correct course, we get back to being the person we think we are. Because changing identity is scary. It means admitting we might not know ourselves as well as we thought. But sometimes life doesn't give us a choice. Sometimes circumstances force the change, and that's when things get complicated. Think about retirement. You spend 30 or 40 years being a teacher or a doctor or a builder. Then one day you stop. You're not that thing anymore. People ask what you do, and you have to say, "I'm retired," which feels like saying, "I used to be someone, but now I'm not." Or think about becoming a parent. Suddenly you're responsible for another human being. Your freedom, your spontaneity, your ability to just do what you want. All of that changes. You're not just yourself anymore. You're someone's mom or dad. And that becomes the dominant part of your identity, whether you expected it to or not. These are obvious shifts, but smaller changes happen all the time. Your body ages, your energy changes, things you used to do easily become harder. You have to adjust your self-image to match reality. And that adjustment isn't always smooth. The identity you built, the one that feels so solid, it's actually more fragile than you think. It depends on circumstances staying relatively stable. When circumstances change, the identity has to change too. In the next part, we'll talk about what triggers these shifts, the moments and events that shake our sense of who we are, because understanding what causes the change helps us navigate it better. For now, just notice how much of who you think you are came from outside sources. How many pieces of your identity were built by other people's words, other people's expectations, other people's needs. You might be surprised how much of it wasn't really your choice. Most days, life moves in a predictable rhythm. You wake up, follow your routines, interact with the same people, do familiar things. Your identity stays stable because your circumstances stay stable. You know who you are because nothing is challenging that knowledge. Then something happens, and everything shifts. Sometimes the trigger is obvious. A big life event that everyone recognizes as significant. You lose your job. A relationship ends. Someone you love dies. You move to a different country. These moments are clear breaking points, before and after. You can point to them and say, "That's when things changed." But sometimes the trigger is quieter, smaller. A conversation that stays with you. A book that makes you see things differently. A moment of clarity during an ordinary Tuesday. These subtle shifts are just as powerful, but harder to recognize while they're happening. Let me tell you about Sarah. She worked in marketing for a tech company. Good salary, nice office, interesting projects. She wasn't unhappy, but she wasn't particularly happy either. It was just what she did, who she was. One weekend, she went hiking with a friend. They got lost on the trail for a few hours. Not dangerously lost, just turned around. No phone signal, no map, just trees and sky and the sound of their footsteps. Sarah expected to feel anxious. She usually did when things didn't go according to plan, but instead she felt calm, present, alive in a way she hadn't felt in months, maybe years. When they finally found the trail again, her friend laughed about the adventure. But Sarah couldn't stop thinking about those lost hours, about how good it felt to not know exactly where she was going, how different that was from her normal life, where everything was planned and scheduled and controlled. That hike was the trigger. Not dramatic, not life-changing in an obvious way, but it planted a question in her mind. What if the person she'd become, the controlled and organized professional, wasn't actually who she wanted to be? Triggers come in many forms. Sometimes it's success. You work hard for something, achieve it, and then realize it doesn't feel the way you thought it would. The promotion you wanted for years finally comes, and instead of satisfaction, you feel empty. This creates a crisis because your whole identity was built around wanting that thing. Other times, it's failure. You try something and it doesn't work. A business fails, a marriage ends, a dream becomes impossible. The future you were building toward disappears. And with it, the version of yourself that was working toward that future. Age is a common trigger too. You turn 30, 40, 50. Arbitrary numbers, but they make you take stock. You look at your life and ask, is this what I wanted? And sometimes the answer is uncomfortable. Health problems trigger identity shifts. Your body stops cooperating the way it used to. You can't do things you took for granted. If your identity was tied to being active or independent or capable, suddenly that foundation cracks. Becoming a parent is a massive trigger. Your priorities shift overnight. The things you used to care about seem less important. The person you were before, with all that freedom and time for yourself, that person has to make room for this new role. Some people struggle with this. They love their child but miss who they used to be. Loss triggers deep shifts. When someone close to you dies, it changes how you see the world. Suddenly life feels more fragile, more precious, more uncertain. The person you were before the loss, the one who felt safe and assumed tomorrow would come, that person can't exist anymore. Even positive changes cause identity shifts. You fall in love, you discover a new passion, you succeed at something you didn't think you could do. These experiences expand who you are, but they also challenge your old self-concept. You have to make room for this new information about yourself. Think about James. He spent his 20s being the party guy, the one who knew where the fun was happening. His friends relied on him for that. It was his role, his identity. Then he met someone, fell in love, started spending more time at home, quiet dinners instead of crowded bars, conversations instead of noise, and he was happy, genuinely happy. But when his old friends called, he felt guilty, like he was betraying them, betraying himself. The party guy wouldn't choose a quiet evening at home, so who was he now? This created tension, not with his partner, but with his own sense of self. The trigger doesn't have to be a single event. Sometimes it's accumulation, small things building up over time until something breaks. You compromise a little here, adjust a little there. One day you wake up and realize you've drifted so far from who you used to be that you barely recognize yourself. This is common in long relationships or long careers. You adapt slowly to keep the peace, to meet expectations, to fit in. Each adaptation seems minor, but after years of adapting, you've become someone you never intended to be. The uncomfortable truth is that triggers are everywhere. Life is constantly presenting opportunities for identity shifts. Most of the time, we resist them. We hold tight to who we think we are. We explain away the contradictions, ignore the uncomfortable feelings, double down on our existing patterns. But sometimes resistance isn't possible. The trigger is too strong, too clear, too unavoidable, and that's when the real struggle begins. Because now you have to decide. Do you fight to stay the same, or do you allow yourself to change? Neither choice is easy. Staying the same means ignoring new parts of yourself that want to emerge. Changing means letting go of parts you've carried for years, parts that feel essential. In the next part, we'll explore why we resist these changes so fiercely, why the idea of becoming someone different feels threatening, even when the old version isn't working anymore. Notice the triggers in your own life. The moments when you felt pulled in a new direction. The times when who you were didn't quite match what you were experiencing. Those moments matter more than you might think. They're invitations to grow, and growth always requires leaving something behind. You'd think that becoming a better version of yourself would be easy, natural, something you'd welcome, but it's not. When identity starts to shift, most of us fight it. Hard. Why? Because change feels like loss. Even when you're changing into someone happier, healthier, or more authentic, you're still losing the old you. And loss hurts, even when it's necessary. There's also fear. Fear of the unknown. The old version of you, even with all its problems, is familiar. You know how that person operates. You know what to expect. The new version? That's uncertain, unpredictable. And humans don't like uncertainty. Let me tell you about Marcus. He was always the reliable one, the friend who showed up when he said he would, the employee who stayed late to finish projects, the son who called his parents every Sunday. Being reliable was his thing. People counted on him, and he took pride in that. But by his mid-30s, Marcus was exhausted. He had no energy left for himself. His calendar was full of other people's needs. When he tried to say no to something, guilt immediately followed, because saying no wasn't what reliable people did. A therapist suggested he start setting boundaries. Simple idea, right? Just protect some time for yourself. But for Marcus, this felt impossible. Not because he couldn't do it technically, but because it would mean he wasn't the reliable person anymore. If he said no to his friend's request for help moving, what would his friend think? If he didn't answer work emails on the weekend, would his boss see him as less committed? If he skipped the family dinner, would his parents be disappointed? The fear wasn't about the actions themselves. It was about what those actions would mean. who he would become if he started prioritizing himself. That person felt selfish to him, foreign, not who he was. So he resisted, kept saying yes even when he wanted to say no, kept showing up even when he needed rest, because protecting his identity felt more important than protecting his energy. This is what resistance looks like. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just the quiet voice that says, "That's not like you," when you try something new, or the anxiety that comes when you imagine changing, or the guilt that follows when you act differently than expected. We resist change because our identity is tied to other people. They know us a certain way. They expect certain things from us. Changing means disrupting those expectations, and we worry about how they'll react. What if they don't like the new version? What if they feel betrayed? What if the change creates distance between you and the people you love? These aren't silly concerns. Sometimes people do react negatively when you change. Your drinking buddies might get upset when you quit drinking. Your family might resist when you challenge traditions. Your partner might struggle when you develop interests that don't include them. Change can threaten relationships because those relationships were built with the old version of you. When you shift, the relationship has to shift too, and not everyone wants to make that adjustment. Think about Elena. She grew up in a traditional family with clear expectations. Women in her family got married young, had children, focused on home and family. That was the pattern, the identity she was supposed to adopt. But Elena wanted to travel, to build a career, to wait before settling down. These weren't bad desires. But in her family, they were seen as selfish, abandoning her responsibilities, choosing herself over family. When she started making choices that reflected what she actually wanted, her family pushed back. Not with anger exactly, with disappointment, with concern, with suggestions that she was making a mistake, with comparisons to her cousins who'd followed the expected path. Elena felt torn. She wanted to honor her family. She loved them. But she also couldn't keep living a life that didn't fit her. The resistance she faced from them created resistance inside herself. Maybe they're right, she'd think. Maybe I am being selfish. This is the painful part. Sometimes the people who love you most will resist your growth. Not because they don't want you to be happy, but because your change challenges their worldview, their own choices, their sense of how things should be. We also resist because identity gives us a sense of control. If you know who you are, you know how to navigate the world. You have a script to follow. Changing means giving up that script, operating without clear guidelines. And that's scary. There's also the sunk cost problem. You've invested years, maybe decades, being a certain person, building a life around that identity. Changing now feels like admitting all that time was wasted, like starting over from zero. Say you spent 20 years building a career in a field you've lost passion for. Admitting that means admitting you chose wrong, that you spent your 20s and 30s moving in a direction that doesn't serve you anymore. That's hard to accept. Easier to just keep going, to tell yourself it'll get better, to wait for retirement. But perhaps the deepest resistance comes from this. We're afraid that if we let go of who we've been, we won't know who we are anymore. Identity, even when it's limiting, provides stability, a sense of self. Without it, we fear we'll just be nothing, undefined, lost. This fear keeps people stuck in jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, beliefs that no longer fit, habits that harm them. Because the alternative, the space of not knowing who you are, feels worse than the pain of staying the same. So we bargain with ourselves. We make small adjustments instead of real changes. We tell ourselves next year will be different. We wait for the perfect time, which never comes. We convince ourselves that the discomfort we feel is normal, manageable, not worth addressing. The resistance is strong because the stakes feel high. You're not just changing a behavior or a habit. You're changing your fundamental sense of self, and that touches everything. Your relationships, your work, your daily life, your future plans. In the next part, we'll talk about what happens when you're caught between versions of yourself. That uncomfortable gap where you're no longer who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. It's one of the loneliest places to be. But understanding it helps. Because if you know that this gap is normal, temporary, part of the process, it becomes a little easier to endure. For now, just notice your own resistance. When have you wanted to change but felt held back? What were you afraid of losing? What were you afraid of becoming? The answers might tell you something important about what you're holding on to, and why. There's a strange period that happens during identity shifts. You're not who you used to be anymore, but you haven't fully become the new person yet. You're somewhere in between, floating, undefined. This gap is uncomfortable, really uncomfortable, because humans like certainty. We like knowing who we are, and in this space, you don't know. You've let go of the old identity or it's fallen away, but the new one hasn't solidified yet. It feels like being lost. Not geographically lost, but existentially lost. You don't know how to introduce yourself anymore. You don't know what you want. You don't know where you fit. Let me tell you about Rachel. She'd been a teacher for 15 years. It wasn't just her job, it was who she was. When people asked about her, she'd say, "I'm a teacher," and that explained everything. Her schedule, her values, her sense of purpose. Then she left teaching. Not because she hated it, but because she needed something different. She was burned out, tired, ready for change. So she quit without having another job lined up. She thought she'd figure it out. The first few weeks felt like freedom. No alarm clock, no lesson plans, no meetings. But after a month, the freedom started feeling like emptiness. When people asked what she didn't know how to answer. "I'm between things," felt weak. "I used to be a teacher," felt like defining herself by the past. She'd go to parties and dread the inevitable question. "So what do you do?" She'd stumble through an answer, watching the person's face for judgment. Did they think she was unemployed? Lazy? Lost? But the worst part wasn't what other people thought. It was how she felt about herself. She'd wake up without a clear purpose. No students depending on her. No structure to her days. She had freedom, yes, but she didn't know what to do with it. Who was she without teaching? This is the gap. This in-between space where your old identity has ended, but your new one hasn't formed yet. It's disorienting because all the markers you use to navigate life are gone. You might be in this gap right now. Maybe a relationship ended and you're no longer someone's partner. Maybe you retired and you're no longer defined by your career. Maybe you moved to a new city and you're no longer part of your old community. Maybe you changed your beliefs and you're no longer part of the group that shared them. Whatever the trigger, you're left in this undefined space. And it's lonely. Because the people who knew the old you might not understand the transition. They still expect you to be that person. They ask you questions based on who you used to be. Your old friends might not fit anymore. The conversations that used to flow easily now feel forced. You've changed, they haven't, and the distance becomes obvious. But you haven't found new friends yet. People who match who you're becoming. So you're alone. Not necessarily physically alone, but alone in the experience. Alone in the uncertainty. Alone in the fear that maybe you made a mistake. Maybe you should have stayed who you were. The gap is where doubt lives. You start questioning everything. Did I give up too easily? Am I running away from something? What if I never figure out who I'm supposed to be? What if this empty feeling is permanent? Think about Daniel. He grew up religious. Church every Sunday, prayer before meals, faith as the foundation of his life. But in his late 20s, he started having doubts. Questions he couldn't answer. Beliefs that didn't make sense anymore. Slowly, he stopped going to church, stopped praying, stopped believing. But he didn't become anything else. He wasn't religious, but he wasn't not religious either. He was just in between. His family still expected him at church events. His old friends still talked about faith, but he couldn't participate honestly anymore. So he pulled away, lost those connections, and felt guilty about it. But he also hadn't found a new community, a new framework for making sense of life. He was in the gap. No longer part of the religious world he grew up in, but not yet comfortable in a secular one. Just floating, trying to figure out what he believed, who he was, where he belonged. The gap is hardest because there's no script for it. Society doesn't really acknowledge this in-between space. We have rituals for endings, graduations, retirement parties, funerals. We have rituals for beginnings, weddings, birth announcements, first days of work. But we don't have rituals for the middle, the messy part where you're neither here nor there. So you navigate it alone, feeling like maybe you're doing something wrong because it's so uncomfortable. Here's what makes it worse. The gap can last a long time, months, years even. It's not a quick transition. You don't wake up one day as the new version of yourself. It's gradual, uncertain, full of backtracking and confusion. Some days you'll feel clear. You'll know who you're becoming. You'll feel excited about it. Other days you'll feel completely lost. You'll miss who you used to be. You'll wonder if change is even worth it. This inconsistency is normal, but it feels like failure. You think you should be making steady progress, moving forward confidently. But identity doesn't work that way. It shifts and changes and sometimes moves backward before it moves forward. The gap is also where shame can creep in. Shame about not having it figured out. Shame about taking so long. Shame about being different from who you used to be. Shame about disappointing people who expected you to stay the same. You might hide in the gap, not tell people what you're going through, put on a mask and pretend you're fine, pretend you know where you're going, because admitting you're lost feels too vulnerable. But here's something important. The gap, as uncomfortable as it is necessary. You can't become someone new without first letting go of who you were. And letting go creates space. Empty space. Undefined space. Space that feels wrong, but is actually essential. Think of it like this. If you want to rearrange a room, you have to move the furniture first. For a while, the room is in chaos. Nothing is where it should be. It looks worse than it did before. But that chaos is necessary. You can't create a new arrangement without it. The gap is your chaos period. You're rearranging. It's supposed to feel uncomfortable. That discomfort is a sign that real change is happening. In the next part, we'll talk about how to navigate this space, how to let go of old parts of yourself without losing everything that matters, how to make peace with the uncertainty while you're still in it, because the gap doesn't last forever. Eventually, something new emerges, but getting there requires patience, courage, and a willingness to sit in the discomfort without running back to what's familiar. If you're in the gap right now, know that you're not alone. Know that it's temporary. And know that on the other side, there's a version of you that fits better. That feels more true. But first, you have to make it through the middle. The hardest question in any identity shift is this: what do I keep and what do I let go? Because you can't take everything with you. Some parts of the old you have to be released, but you also don't want to lose everything. Some parts are worth keeping. Essential even. The trick is knowing which is which. This isn't easy. When you're in the middle of change, everything feels connected. You worry that if you let go of one piece, the whole thing will unravel, that you'll lose yourself completely. Let me tell you about Kevin. He spent his 20s being the ambitious guy, always working, always networking, always climbing. His friends admired his drive. His family was proud of his success. He was good at it, and it gave him identity, purpose. But in his early 30s, something shifted. The ambition that used to energize him started feeling empty. He was achieving things, but they didn't mean what they used to. He started wondering if there was more to life than the next promotion, the next goal. He wanted to slow down, spend more time with people he loved, have hobbies that weren't productive, just exist without constantly striving. But this created a problem. If he wasn't ambitious, who was he? His whole identity was built around drive and achievement. Letting go of that felt like becoming nobody, like giving up what made him special. He was afraid that if he stopped being ambitious, he'd become lazy, mediocre, forgettable. He'd lose the respect he'd earned. People would be disappointed in him. So he held on, kept pushing even though it exhausted him, because letting go felt too risky. This is the trap. We think it's all or nothing. Either we stay exactly who we've been, or we become someone completely different. But that's not how it works. Change doesn't require abandoning everything. Kevin eventually realized something important. He could let go of the relentless ambition without losing his ability to work hard. He could slow down without becoming lazy. He could value rest without losing his drive entirely. The shift wasn't about becoming the opposite of who he was. It was about adjusting the balance, making room for parts of himself that had been ignored. This is what letting go actually looks like. It's not erasing the old you. It's releasing the parts that don't serve you anymore while keeping what's valuable. Think about it like a tree. Every autumn, trees let go of their leaves, but they don't lose their branches, their roots, their essential structure. They release what's no longer needed so they can survive the winter and grow again in spring. You can do the same. Release the parts of your identity that were only there to please others, to fit in, to meet expectations. Keep the parts that feel true, that make you who you are at your core. But how do you know which is which? Start by asking yourself this. Does this part of me give me energy, or does it drain me? Does it feel authentic, or does it feel like a performance? Did I choose it, or did someone else choose it for me? These questions help, but they're not always clear-cut. Sometimes parts of you are both draining and important. Sometimes you chose something years ago that doesn't fit anymore, but letting go feels like betraying your past self. There's no perfect formula, but there's a feeling you can pay attention to. When you think about letting something go, notice what comes up. Is it relief, or is it grief? Relief means it's probably time to release it. Grief means there's something there worth examining. Maybe you need to keep it, or maybe you need to grieve it before you can let it go. Sarah had always been the peacemaker in her family, the one who smoothed over conflicts, kept everyone happy, made sure no one was upset. It was exhausting. She wanted to stop. But when she imagined not doing it anymore, she felt sad. Not because she loved the role, but because that role had given her value. It had made her necessary. Without it, who would she be to her family? Just another person? Not special anymore? She needed to grieve the role before she could release it. Grieve the younger version of herself who took it on because she didn't know she had other options. Grieve the relationships that were built on her being that person. Only after grieving could she let go. And when she did, something interesting happened. She didn't lose her family's love. The relationships shifted, yes, but they became more honest, more balanced, better actually. This happens more often than you'd think. The thing you're afraid to release, the identity you're clinging to, it's often holding you back more than you realize. And the people who truly care about you will adjust to the new version. The ones who can adjust were probably relating to the role, not to you. But here's what's important. Letting go doesn't mean rejecting your past. It doesn't mean deciding that the old you was wrong or bad. The old version of you got you here. It served a purpose. It taught you things. It kept you safe, or helped you survive, or gave you skills you still use. You can honor that while still moving forward. You can be grateful for who you were while becoming someone new. Think of it like outgrowing clothes. When you get rid of a shirt that doesn't fit anymore, you're not saying the shirt was bad. You're just acknowledging that it served its time. You wore it, it was useful, and now it's time for something different. Your old identity is the same. It wasn't wrong. It just doesn't fit anymore. The parts worth keeping are usually the values underneath the behaviors. Maybe you were always the responsible one, but what you actually value is caring for people. You can keep that value while releasing the exhausting behavior of being responsible for everything. Maybe you were the funny one, but what you actually value is connection. You can keep seeking connection while releasing the pressure to always make people laugh. Maybe you were the successful one, but what you actually value is growth. You can keep growing while releasing the need to prove yourself through achievements. See the difference? You're not losing what matters. You're just expressing it differently, in ways that fit who you're becoming. In the next part, we'll talk about how to actively build the new version of yourself. Because letting go is only half of the process. The other half is discovering and developing what comes next. And that part, while still challenging, can actually be exciting. Because you get to choose. You get to experiment. You get to become someone who feels more true to who you actually are. But it starts with making peace with letting go. With trusting that you won't lose yourself in the process. With believing that what's essential will remain, and what falls away was only weighing you down. Think about what you're holding on to right now. What parts of your identity feel heavy? What would it feel like to set them down, even just for a moment? You might be surprised by how much lighter you feel. So you've let go of parts that don't fit anymore. You're in that uncomfortable gap. Now what? How do you actually become the new version of yourself? The answer might surprise you. You don't figure it out by thinking. You figure it out by doing, by experimenting, by trying things and seeing what feels right. Most people approach identity change backward. They think they need to know who they want to be before they start acting differently. But it doesn't work that way. You become someone new by acting like them first. The identity follows the behavior, not the other way around. Let me tell you about Amy. After her divorce, she felt lost. For 12 years, she'd been someone's wife. That identity shaped everything. where she lived, how she spent her time, who her friends were. When the marriage ended, all of that disappeared. She didn't know who she was anymore, so she did what a lot of people do. She tried to think her way to an answer. She made lists. She read self-help books. She asked herself deep questions about her values and purpose. But none of it helped. Because knowing yourself isn't an intellectual exercise, it's an experiential one. You have to live your way into the answer. So Amy stopped thinking and started trying. She took a pottery class, even though she'd never been artistic. She joined a hiking group, even though she'd always preferred staying inside. She started cooking new recipes, traveling alone, saying yes to invitations she would have declined before. Most of these experiments didn't stick. She quit pottery after a few weeks. The hiking group wasn't really her thing. But some things surprised her. She discovered she loved cooking. Not just the eating part, but the process. The creativity of it. The way it made her feel capable and present. She started hosting small dinner parties. This led to deeper friendships, which led to feeling more connected, more herself. She wasn't trying to become a chef or a host. She was just following what felt good. And through that following, a new version of herself emerged. This is how it works. You try things, small things usually. You notice what gives you energy and what drains you. You pay attention to moments when you feel most alive, most authentic, and you move toward more of those moments. You don't need a grand plan. You don't need to know the destination. You just need to take the next small step. Think about a baby learning to walk. They don't plan it out. They don't study walking or develop a strategy. They just try. They fall. They try again. Slowly, through repetition and adjustment, they figure it out. Their body learns before their mind understands. Building a new identity is similar. Your body, your emotions, your intuition know things before your conscious mind catches up. So you have to trust the process, trust the experiments, trust that trying and failing is part of learning who you are. Here's the key. Start with curiosity, not commitment. You're not deciding who you'll be for the rest of your life. You're just exploring, asking, what if I tried this? How would that feel? Maybe you've always been quiet in groups. What if you tried speaking up once in your next meeting? Not to become an extrovert, just to see how it feels. Maybe it's uncomfortable. Or maybe you discover you actually have things to say and people listen. Maybe you've always said yes to everything. What if you tried saying no to one request this week, not to become selfish, just to see what happens? Maybe you feel guilty. Or maybe you feel relief. Maybe nothing bad happens at all. These small experiments give you information, data about who you're becoming. And they're low risk because they're small. If something doesn't work, you just try something else. Let me tell you about Marcus again. Remember, he was the reliable guy who never said no. He started with tiny experiments. He declined one extra work project, just one, and waited to see what happened. His boss didn't fire him. His coworkers didn't hate him. The world didn't fall apart. So he tried again. He skipped one family dinner. His parents were fine. He told a friend he couldn't help them move. The friendship survived. Each small experiment proved something important. He could set boundaries without losing everything. The catastrophe he'd imagined didn't come. And slowly, a new identity emerged. Not the person who said yes to everything, but the person who chose carefully, who protected his energy, who was still helpful, but not at his own expense. The experiments don't have to be about saying no. They can be about saying yes to things you've been avoiding, new experiences, new people, new ways of thinking. David, the lawyer who felt empty, started experimenting outside of work. He took a woodworking class. It had nothing to do with law, nothing productive about it, just making things with his hands. At first it felt like wasting time, but he kept going. And he noticed something. When he was working with wood, his mind quieted. The constant anxiety about being successful, being good enough, it faded. He was just present with the material, the tools, the process. This didn't mean he quit law to become a woodworker, but it showed him something about who he wanted to be. Someone who made space for creating, someone who valued the process, not just the outcome. Someone who could do something just because it felt good, not because it advanced his career. These insights don't come from thinking. They come from doing. From paying attention to how different activities, different choices, different behaviors make you feel. As you experiment, patterns emerge. You start noticing what energizes you, what feels authentic, what makes you lose track of time, what makes you feel proud of yourself. And you start noticing the opposite too. What drains you, what feels like pretending, what you only do because you think you should, what makes you feel resentful. Both kinds of information are useful. They help you adjust. Try more of this, less of that. Move toward what feels right, away from what doesn't. But here's what's important. Be patient with the process. Building a new identity takes time. You're not going to wake up tomorrow as a completely different person. And that's okay. You're not supposed to. Think of it like planting a garden. You plant seeds. You water them. You wait. Some seeds grow, some don't. You adjust based on what works. Slowly, over weeks and months, the garden takes shape. But it's not instant, and it's never finished. It keeps growing and changing. Your identity is the same. You try things. Some stick, some don't. You adjust, you grow, and over time, a new version of you emerges. Not finished, not perfect, just more aligned with who you actually are. The experiments also need honesty. Pay attention to your real reactions, not the reactions you think you should have. If something that's supposed to be fun feels like a chore, notice that. If something unexpected brings you joy, notice that too. Your feelings are data. They're telling you something about what fits and what doesn't. Listen to them. In the next part, we'll talk about accepting that you'll always be evolving. That identity isn't something you figure out once and then you're done. It's ongoing, shifting. And learning to be comfortable with that can change everything. For now, think about one small experiment you could try this week. Not a big commitment, just a small step towards something different, something curious, something that might tell you something about who you're becoming. And then try it. See what happens. Pay attention, adjust. That's how you build the new you. One small experiment at a time. Here's something that might seem strange at first. You're never going to finish becoming yourself. There's no final version, no point where you can say, okay, I'm done. This is who I am forever. Because you're always changing. Life keeps moving, circumstances keep shifting, and you keep evolving. The person you are today will be different from the person you are in 5 years. And that's not a problem to solve. It's just how being human works. Most of us resist this idea. We want to arrive somewhere, to figure ourselves out completely, and then relax into that knowledge. We want stability. A solid answer to the question, who am I? But identity doesn't work that way. It's not a destination. It's more like a river, always moving, always changing shape, never exactly the same from one moment to the next. Think about who you were 10 years ago. You probably had different priorities, different fears, different dreams. Some of your beliefs have changed, some of your habits, the way you spend your time, the way you see the world. You're not that person anymore. But you also didn't stop being you. You're still you, just a different version. And 10 years from now, you'll be another version. Still you, but different again. This can feel unsettling. If you're always changing, what stays consistent? What makes you, you? The answer is simpler than it seems. What stays consistent is the fact of your existence, your consciousness, your awareness of being alive, the through line of your experience. That doesn't change, even as everything else does. You contain all your past versions. The child you were, the teenager, the young adult, all the versions in between. They're still part of you, not gone, just integrated. Layers of experience that shape who you are now. And you'll contain future versions too. The person you'll be next year, in 10 years when you're old. They're already there in potential, waiting to emerge through time and experience. Let me tell you about Linda. She's in her 60s now. When she looks back at her life, she sees so many different versions of herself. The ambitious young professional, the overwhelmed new mother, the woman rebuilding after divorce, the grandmother, the person she is now with more time and less urgency. For years, she felt shame about the earlier versions, the choices she made that she wouldn't make now, the person she was in her 30s who prioritized work over family, the person in her 40s who stayed in a relationship too long. But eventually she made peace with something. Those versions weren't mistakes. They were her, doing the best she could with what she knew at the time. Each version taught her something. Each one was necessary to become who she is now. She doesn't need to reject them or be embarrassed by them. They're part of her story, part of the whole picture. And the whole picture includes contradiction, growth, change, failure, learning. This is what living as multiple versions means. Accepting that you've been many people, you are many people, and you'll continue to be many people. And all of them are valid. All of them are you. It also means accepting that you contain contradictions. You're not one simple thing. You're complex. You can be ambitious and tired, social and solitary, confident and uncertain. These contradictions don't mean something's wrong with you. They mean you're human. Society often wants us to be consistent, to have a clear brand, a definable personality, a predictable pattern. But real people aren't like that. Real people are messy, full of competing desires, full of parts that don't always agree with each other. You might want adventure and security at the same time. You might value independence and connection. You might be the person who loves deep conversations and also the person who sometimes just wants to watch silly videos and not think. All of these are you. You don't have to choose. You don't have to be only one thing. Think about James from earlier. He was the party guy who fell in love and started preferring quiet evenings. He felt like he had to choose. Either he was the party guy or he was the quiet homebody. But actually, he was both. Some nights he still wanted to go out. Some nights he wanted to stay in. Both were true. Both were him. The conflict only existed because he thought he had to be consistent. Once he let go of that need, things got easier. He could go out when he felt like it and stay in when he didn't. His friends adjusted, his partner understood, and he stopped feeling torn between two identities because he realized he could hold both. This flexibility is important, because life will keep presenting new situations, new challenges, new opportunities, and you'll need different versions of yourself for different contexts. At work, you might be focused and professional. At home, relaxed and playful. With old friends, maybe you revert to some younger version of yourself. With new people, you try on different ways of being. This isn't being fake. It's being adaptive. It's recognizing that you're not a fixed thing. You're a response to life. And life requires different things in different moments. The key is making sure all these versions feel authentic, that you're not performing or pretending, but expressing genuine parts of yourself. When you have to be someone you're not, that's exhausting. But when you can move fluidly between different genuine versions of yourself, that's healthy, natural. So how do you live this way? How do you stay grounded when you're constantly changing? First, stop expecting yourself to have it all figured out. Give yourself permission to evolve, to change your mind, to want different things at different times, to be uncertain. Second, pay attention to your values, not your behaviors, but the deeper principles underneath them. Your values might stay relatively stable even as everything else shifts. Things like honesty, kindness, growth, connection. These can be your anchor while the surface changes. Third, be curious about who you're becoming. Instead of judging your changes as good or bad, just notice them. Ask yourself, what's different about me now? What's the same? What's emerging? Fourth, give yourself space to try things without commitment. You don't have to know if something will be permanent. You can just explore, see what fits, let go of what doesn't. And fifth, talk to people about it. Not everyone will understand, but some will. Finding people who are also navigating identity shifts, who are also evolving and uncertain, that helps. It reminds you that you're not alone in this, that it's normal, human. The goal isn't to become someone and stay that way forever. The goal is to keep growing, keep learning, keep adjusting, to be alive to the changes instead of resisting them, to trust that each version of you has something to offer. Think about it this way. A tree doesn't stay the same. It grows new leaves every spring. It sheds them every fall. Its branches extend, its roots deepen. It responds to weather, to seasons, to time. But it's always a tree, always itself, even as it changes. You're the same. Always yourself, even as you change, always growing, always shedding, always responding to life. And that's not something to fear. It's something to embrace. Because it means you're alive. You're not stuck. You're not finished. You're still becoming. And you always will be. If one idea from this conversation stayed with you, I'd be curious to know which one. But more than that, I hope you feel a little less alone in whatever transition you're going through. a little less afraid of changing, a little more willing to let yourself become whoever you're meant to be next. Because whoever that is, they're already there, inside you, waiting for you to give them permission to emerge. And when you do, you might be surprised by what you discover.